Okay, we're going to go ahead and start, and there's about 10 or 12 people online, and as you come online, I do ask you to keep yourself muted until we get to a discussion part, but we do like to see your faces if you're willing to do that. We've got even newer technology in here today. We have speaker phones in the ceiling, and that should pick up the voice of the speakers, and it will pick up your voices and your sneezes and your rustlings of paper. So just beware. Come on in and have a seat. And so we continue to launch there's a new car on this train that's added every week as we're going. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn this over to Kathy Harkness. You need to stand here so you can be seen. Okay, and then I'll introduce the speakers. So.
Good morning, and he's not really turning this over to me because we're turning it over to other people who are much more knowledgeable, but I do want to welcome everybody, and isn't it nice to be back in church and back? Very nice to see people and see people in person, but see people on the screen, and really welcome everybody, and glad that we're all able to be here together. And this is the beginning class for a group that has worked very hard on the Therefore project, which is really a study of racism, both with the Presbyterian Church, with Alexandria. I'm sure it's much more far-reaching than even I can begin to tell you, because I wasn't part of the process, but I have been looking at the classes that are to come, and I think it's going to be not only educational, but exciting and interesting and informative, and it will give us all opportunity to think about who we are and what our beliefs are and how we live our lives. So I welcome us all to this first class and this first program, and Larry will shortly introduce. I'd like us to open with prayer, if you all would join me, please. Thank you, Lord, for bringing us together to share our time, our faith, and our stories in the coming weeks. Thank you for the work and energies of those who have planned, studied, and will lead us during our time together in the weeks to come. Today, we pray that we would hear your voice and the wisdom from those who are going to share their faith with us. We ask that your Holy Spirit would be at work, opening our ears to hear, our minds to discern, and our hearts to receive your word. It's a joy that we are all able to be together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. So again, if you're at home, we do ask you to put your face on if you're willing, just so we can have some degree of participation. And with that, you will need to unmute yourself if you have a question when we have a discussion part. So with that, I want to introduce the two people who are speakers today. If you all will recall, back when we started the Therefore project, we had the opportunity for members of the church to participate in groups where they essentially told their own stories of faith and experiences of racial issues and experiences in America. Donald Gordon and Erskine Wells were two members of the Therefore committee that both been at Westminster about 10 years, if not a little bit longer. Both are parents of kids in our program, so their kids are presumably they are here. We're hoping that all the children of the church are outside today as we come back. But we're going to start this series with them simply telling their stories and playing off one another, and there'll be time for questions. So I will let them introduce themselves. So you all come and take a seat. And
hello, I'm Donald Gordon. You're Erskine, obviously. There's two of us, organization. Thanks, I'll go first. So Donald Gordon, so I joined the church in 2008. It's so being in church that long, there's been a few things have been asked to join committees here and there. And I've always had an opportunity to say no because I had younger kids and they say like, oh, well, this one's not potty trained, or oh, I got a second one, or what have you. And I felt the level of person who would ask would get higher and higher in the church. And so when the airport committee was set up, the Larry called, it was like, okay, well, I don't want a bishop calling. So I will say yes and join the committee. And it was great. Like I enjoyed the Erskine and the other, we had 10, 12. Yes. The other members, it was really great to meet everyone and interact. That was obviously a very important topic. So I talked a little bit about myself and growing up and kind of the perspective I felt I brought to the committee and what I was looking for us as a church as we wrestle with these issues as all the country and I mean, most of the world is wrestling with. So I grew up in San Francisco. I was born and raised in San Francisco. Me and my mom were born actually the same hospital, Kaiser Permanente on Gary Boulevard. But everyone else in my family was born in South. So my mom's mom was born in East Texas, according to Lufkin, Texas, and her mom in Boulevard. And then my dad was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So when I meet people at work, I tell them like, hey, I born in San Francisco by way of the South, because really everyone I hung out with and interacted with was very Southern. So occasionally phrases will come out of my mouth and people like, I thought you grew up in California. That is a weird thing for you to say. And I was like, wait, that's not a normal thing people say, because that was normal growing up, how people said things. So growing up in San Francisco, it was this Bay Area, very racially diverse set of friends. My church life, I spent my weekends and summer vacations and Christmas vacations. Anytime I was not in school, I spent with my great grandmother. And my great grandmother, so she was Pentecostal, went to the Church of God in Christ, and we went to church on the weekends from 10 to 3-ish on Sunday. And during the summers, we went 5 days a week. So we went Sunday morning to afternoon, Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, Friday night. So it was like a work day, a work week of church going. And I don't know why I'm saying this, but when I went to college, I didn't go to church that much. I felt like I had built up my church time and my hours. So whenever I wake up on a Sunday, not wanting to go, I'd be like, okay, well, that time when I was 7 and I went for 8 hours, that'll count for today. So a lot of church time, a lot of old school religion, I guess you would call it. And then I became or at least joined the Presbyterian Church during my freshman or sophomore year in high school. So my grandmother was Presbyterian, and my grandmother wanted me to go to Vacation Bible School, help out during that 2 weeks. And so I went. I really enjoyed the church, and I was doing more sports and things like that. And it was close to my home. I started attending there during my last couple of years until I went to college. So growing up, very diverse. So we had questions on different committees, talk about like, what was your interactions with people of other faiths or other ethnicities and what have you. That was just a normal part of growing up. One colleague talked about like, if there was a fight, you were afraid like, oh, if there was one white person was fighting one black person, would have turned this huge thing in the school. Like that was such a foreign concept to me, because I got into lots of fights with white kids, black kids, Hispanics, so like it didn't matter. Like no one ever put the racial element on that fight. It was just two people didn't like each other for that hour and they were fighting. So that was just a very foreign concept to me. And in college, I went to college in Boston, again, very multi-ethnic, racial. Then really thought about race, but not in those very stark terms. And I went to the Army right after. And again, Army, of course, is a very multi-ethnic place. In the network meeting, obviously, we were brought together talking about George Floyd and our reactions in aftermath. And obviously, any sort of reaction is a horrible thing. You don't want to see someone's or hear about someone's life being ended in such a grotesque manner. But we talked about, were you surprised by it? And my answer was no. Like it was I was like, that happened. That's not a normal thing, but a thing that isn't a rare occurrence. And it made me think about like my reaction to that, made me think about like, well, what was it? Like, why was that normal to me? I had not had that kind of interaction with police, but where did that come from? And, we have, now we talk a lot about, not we, like in media or whatever, you talk about the talk, right? That Black parents give to mostly their Black sons about how to interact in our society, especially with law enforcement. The misnomer is that is a talk. It's like a one-time thing, like the sex talk or don't do drugs talk. For me, growing up, it was an ever-present conversation in all interactions with my mom, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother. So, you know, me and my great-grandmother, we would go around, we're always on the bus. So we would take the mini bus around, and if she saw someone with, you know, their jeans down and maybe some of their boxers or underwear showing, just say, don't ever do that when you leave the house, have your pants up or whatever. Now, she never said like because of this reason, but it was just a teaching point of this is how you act in society to make sure that you will live to adulthood. If we ever saw interactions with, you know, people on the street with police officers, she's always like, look at what they're doing. What do you think is wrong there? I was like, I don't know, they seem to be fine. She's like, no, always have your hands in front of you. And she would stand up and she's like, if you're ever talking to a police officer, always have your hands like this. And she would never say why. And I'd be like, oh, what if I stand like this? No, always have your hands crossed in front of you where they can see both your hands. And I remember that as a kid, like 4 years old, 5 years old, having that conversation with her. With my mom, when we'd be driving around, if she saw someone pulled over, you know, I remember being in middle school, so I would have been 9, 10, 11 years old. She'd say, oh, a police officer ever pulls you over, roll down your window and put your hands on your steering wheel and don't move them until he says so. I was like, well, I'm 5 years from driving. Why are you telling me this? It was just like, no, you have to pay attention. And it was just a constant conversation with everything you do, that you would see it, and it was an example of either what to do or what not to do, as they were trying to teach me how to, you know, survive and have interactions with, you know, law enforcement. After George Floyd, I recognized that I've also been doing it with my own children, just not on purpose, it's just a part of this, I don't know, whatever it is, I was just doing it myself. And so now my son Oliver is 10, or turning 10 in a couple of weeks, and Julia just turned 6. And with Oliver especially, I am very cognizant of who he is and making sure he interacts well and shows himself. And I told a story in one of the committee members about, you know, he had a birthday party, he was 5 or 6, and he had water guns, and he like ran to the front of the house with his water guns, chasing one of his other friends. And it was just a shock of panic seeing him run around to the front. And I knew it was like, no, stop, you guys gotta go to the backyard. And he's like, why? We have the 2 doors on our backyard and we can make this loop. And I was like, no, like I can't have you running around the front yard with a pink gun on you, because people perceive you as a Black man with a gun. I cannot have that. You have to play in the backyard. And obviously 5 or 6 years old, he doesn't understand, he just thinks I'm being mean to him. But it's like, I just can't do it. If you're gonna play with the gun, with the water guns, you have to do it in the backyard. And it's like, okay, fine. You know, so he goes to the backyard. There are times when I see him, because we don't live 2 blocks down. So you know, most of his friends are white and a couple of Hispanic kids. You know, if I see them, you know, here at the park at George Mason or what have you, and if I see him acting a certain way, I will pull him aside like, hey, that's not how you act when you're outside the house. Like you have to comport yourself a little bit better, because your actions will look different than one of your friends' actions. And so when he was younger, he didn't quite understand. Now he is beginning to understand as he gets older why I was so adamant that he does things a certain way. So it's so that's the interactions there with him. My family also talked a lot about education. It was if you're going to move on and do some of your life, it's all about education. That's how you'll get out of whatever circumstance you're in. It's definitely something I've been imparting to the kids. Like, you got to read, you got to do math, you got to learn multiplication tables, whatever it is. I don't know why I went to that tangent. Just bring up a lot of memories of my great grandmother. It always, because I've always been tall for my age, and I'm still, I guess, tall for my age. We would walk around, and you know, people would automatically say, "Oh, your grandson, your great grandson, should play basketball, and that's how he's going to go and go to college or whatever." what have you. And she'd always say, no, he's not gonna play basketball, he's going to school and academic college scholarship. That was before I even knew what colleges were, what academic scholarship was. Like I knew what a basketball player was, because I could play, see basketball and see people make lots of money. But she was just adamant that that was just not how you're going to get out of here. You're gonna get out of here on working hard and education. So let's see. So then, so perspective. Okay, so that's the next thing I want to say. So, we live in a very affluent area, and you would think like, okay, well, why, Donald, are you teaching your kids this isn't obviously an area where we have a problem with police, with Alexander City Police Department. And it's true. Like I've had a couple interactions where I've had to call them for break-ins and what have you. I've always had a very amazing professional interaction with them. So no, I don't personally have an issue, with the police department here or think there's a problem. However, there are times where I've been followed by a police department in our neighborhood. And so I like to run in the morning. So I usually get up at 5 and I'll get up and run just around. And my wife is really always scared of me going out because she's on an app, Neighborly or whatever the app is, that people post on there about various things that are going on. And a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was several people posting that there was a black peeping Tom in our neighborhood who in the mornings would run around and look in people's bedrooms. And she was like, please, like first she told me, I kind of joked like, oh wait, what street was that? It's like, okay, good. I understand you're serious. It is not me. But I will make sure when I'm running, I'm just running. Which is what I would do anyway, running far enough. But I'm like, say, hey, tomorrow morning I'm gonna run. I can see it. She's like, okay, be careful. Like, yep, I know, got it. So there's been at least 3 or 4 times where I've been followed by a CPD. And I always wear reflective vests, whether it's the summertime, the sun's gonna be up in 5 minutes after I'm running. I always have it on. I try to make it very clear, like I am running, like this is what I'm out here doing. One time in particular, I always stop on Allison, and then I walk the next block home. And I just felt someone was looking at me. And I was like, oh, what's going on? So I went down and pretended I had to tie my shoe, and there was a cruiser who kind of like parked maybe half a block up and had his lights on. And I was like, oh, okay, that's the cruiser. What should I do? So normally what I would do, because it's about 6:30 when I usually get back, I lift up so we have a gate, like I said, on our backyard fence, and it's a wooden door that's broken. So I have to lift it up, so I can like lift it and move it, so I don't make a screeching noise and wake everyone up, which is why I'm trying to go in the back anyway. And then I go into the backyard and then go down the steps to the door where my basement is, and the basement door, like all are too large for the frame. So I have to open the door and with my full weight, push it open. So as I'm thinking about the next 2 steps I'm going to go through, my mind starts racing of, does this cruiser believe he has spotted the peeping Tom in our neighborhood? And what is his perception when he sees me lift up this fence in a quiet manner, not to wake people up? And then if he follows me, what's he going to think when I push through this door with my full weight? Is his perception to be like, oh, is this someone back from running going into his house? No. So what I did was I just stretched on my front lawn for the next 30 minutes. And he stayed there. And then at 7 o'clock, that's when my wife and the kids wake up for school and work. I was very demonstrably taking out my keys, like finding the one key, as like this whole kabuki, and then open my front door and then he left. So I have no idea, like, is that going to be the one bad seed on ACPD? I don't know, but it is something that is present when there's interactions, even in a place like our area, which has a big police department, professional police department. It is an interaction I have because it's just a perspective coming from even in a good area like this. So I say that to say that's just reinforced why I've been teaching my son and trying to get him to interact and understand, have this sixth sense about interacting with law enforcement. So we talked about this as a committee. on what we felt our committee should do, what our charter should be. One of the places I came from was, well, I come to church for God's grace. Like, we're here to, help people have a better relationship with the Lord and understand the Bible and things like that. There are aspects of my life that if I want to go do those things, I can do them separate from the church body. When I come here, I'm here for spiritual enrichment. So that was the perspective I came with the committee of if it's in the Bible, that's what we should be doing, and that's how we should try, even if it's race or whatever the topic is. What is it that we have to do as a church community to improve on these things? We talked about other communities having Black Lives Matter on their front signage, and I'm not opposed to that. I think we had a sign on our house for a few months, but I don't know if I would want that at my church. I know when we were my wife and I were looking for a community. We visited a few Presbyterian, Episcopalian, and Catholic churches because she's Catholic, and there were clearly ones that were, I guess, progressive. I don't want to use that term, but were more social justice churches. And even though I agreed with it, I didn't want that to be a part of my church experience. It was like, that's not like, when I want to do social justice, I go do it. when I want to talk about gun control, I can talk about gun control, or whatever topic it is that's going to polarize our society, I can go do that. When I come to church, I want to speak and hear about God. So that was the perspective I brought and my upbringing, and I will in there and pass it off to her.
Well, I'm glad we decided I would go second, because not very impactful at all.
Well, you've got, 40 minutes now.
That's wonderful. Well, again, Erskine Wells has been a member of the church a little over a decade. As Larry said, I've got two boys, 9 and 7, about the same age as Donald's kids. And similar, when Larry asks you to be part of a committee, you say yes. I did say to him, as a white male Protestant from Mississippi, my perspective on race is not often asked, and I don't often volunteer it. So I look forward to being a part of this and weighing in where I can. I work downtown in DC. I'm a lobbyist. Prior to that, I worked on Capitol Hill for about a decade, both in the House and the Senate. So certainly around politically intense topics, a lot of my day-to-day. And much like Donald said, I come to church not to kind of have some of those conversations. I come to church to equip myself with the perspective and the spirituality to have those conversations outside. And so to me, that kind of direct relationship with God is very important to me. And it's a big part of why I like Westminster. So I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. Mississippi is a 60-40, probably white African-American state. Jackson's probably 50-50. Despite that, I grew up in a very segregated kind of life. Most of my friends were white. Most of my parents' friends were white. I went to a private school in Jackson where most of the student body was white. So it was kind of a strange, dichotomy, if you will, between what I knew about the state and what I experienced day to day. I was fortunate enough that I played a lot of sports. And so actually athletics was kind of the way I got to know other people. And it was kind of the lens I looked at somebody, was not necessarily how much money they had, what their race or religion was, but were they a good teammate? Were they somebody you could count on? So I think that was kind of a helpful perspective for me. I do laugh looking back on it, because I think if you grew up in Texas, you take Texas state history like every year. Mississippi, we really didn't talk a lot about Mississippi's history. We tended to kind of focus maybe a little bit on the Native Americans, and then, we never really got to Emmett Till, Medgar Evers, or some of that perspective. And I thought a lot about that as we talked about the history of Westminster and the history of Alexandria, as we were kind of tackling some of these issues. I know it's a topic Melinda's certainly been working on. But grew up in Mississippi, went to school in North Carolina. All my friends in Mississippi said I was going to become a Yankee when I went to school in North Carolina. My grandfather, who was Erskine Wells Sr., who I was very close with, took me to lunch and had all these great words of wisdom: find a good church, be careful who you hang out with, Don't get an earring. He hated earrings for whatever reason. And then the last comment he made to me was, no matter what you do, don't come home with a girlfriend from New Jersey. Which is funny because, as Larry knows, my wife is from New Jersey. Freshman year at Davis.
Have you ever been back home now?
Exactly. That's why we live in DC. But when I went to college, I was fortunate enough to play football, and one of my real good friends was an African American running back from Charlotte. And it was one of the first times I understood the perspective people had of me being from Mississippi, which is we were on like a road trip and we were talking about something he found out from Mississippi. And he said, people who look like me hang from trees that look like that in Mississippi. And it was just such a stark comment to kind of hear as somebody who had, grown up and to be out of the state in such a different perspective. So that was certainly eye-opening for me and something I carried with me. But throughout, for me, we were always taught to try and be colorblind. Don't see race, right? So much of, I think, my parents growing up in the South, everything was about race. And so you were thinking you were doing right by not focusing on race, not thinking about it, trying to be colorblind was this, goal you were kind of seeking to achieve. So, got through college, moved to DC, started working again, as I said, working in politics. And, George Floyd certainly was a big moment for me, as it was for a lot of people. I cannot say I had the same reaction Donald had. I didn't think, oh, this is something that happens. Certainly, I was aware of a lot of the other instances. And candidly, I think the Eric Gardner situation in New York was one that really jumped out at me as kind of such a shocking moment. But the perspective I've always kind of looked at things was, certainly race was a factor. I just didn't have the experience with it to be able to pull from those personal experiences or talks, as Donald kind of well discussed. So then my kind of reaction was always to kind of question the police and how the police were doing their jobs. And are we getting the right people to do that job? And what are we asking them to do? And so I think that was a little bit of the perspective I brought, again, when Larry asked me to be a part of this, was certainly the racial piece of it, which again, I started to realize just aspiring to be colorblind maybe wasn't enough. And we needed to go certainly beyond that. But then also asking who are the people that we're, putting so much reliance upon to police our neighborhoods and to ensure that laws are followed and ensure that we're living in a safe society. And I think that was a lot of what I thought about as we started having some of our discussions. I'll never forget when Donald told the water gun story, because again, as a father of two little boys who have Nerf guns and water guns, I've seen it, and I've seen them run around, and it never dawned on me to be concerned about my kid running around with a blue and orange Nerf gun. But after that, we have a new rule that you only play within the backyard. Whether it's my kids have the same threat as Donald's or not, that was just something we kind of decided for my boys, which of course they think I'm a great father for putting that rule in place. One of these days I'll blame you. I probably should do that now. And then I guess as we think about the Therefore project and what we were looking to try and accomplish, I think the perspective I took of it from was, what has been the role of the church and what is the role of our Presbyterian church as we think about challenging these big issues and having these discussions about it. And for me, one of the big things was looking at it through that lens of, I think our church does a great job of trying to establish that direct connection with God, and thinking about the Constitution of our Presbyterian Church, the Book of Order, again, all these things that we went through in our meetings, and really seeing that it felt to me that the role of the church should be, and one that we recommended, would be to try and help facilitate the discussions, facilitate people to learn, to understand their faith, to understand how it intersects with race, and certainly to understand the history of kind of where we come from with it. But then to allow that individual to make that decision as far as how they want to become involved in it, and to take that action with them, armed with the community of faith that we're a part of, but also able to make their own private judgment about the way they want to look at these issues. And we had a lot of great discussions and debates. We came up with our recommendations to the session. I think we did a nice job trying to kind of thread the needle on the right way to kind of go forward with it. But these are tough discussions and tough topics. My final big takeaway that I'd offer is one thing we realized is we started doing some of these community discussions with folks in the church. They would sign up and you would kind of moderate a discussion. And, we didn't get overwhelming attendance, but what was clear to me was people in our church want to have these conversations about race, but they struggle to figure out how to do it. The words are hard. It's hard to find the right words to say about this. But I think as the church, if we can continue to find ways, maybe through adult education classes, which is certainly the first step, to help people feel like they're in a safe environment to be able to have some of these very difficult conversations, I think that's one of the best things we can be doing, because you are challenging a lot of maybe of what your perspective has been for your life. I have a different perspective now as a 40-year-old than I did growing up in Mississippi, than I did 5 months ago before I remember Donald telling the story about the water guns. Finding a way to kind of lean on each other and leverage our faith as our common component, I think would be very effective. So, thank you all for having us.
Let's give them a hand, but they're not doing it. I'll stand here, I'm gonna see about the, I guess that view. Yeah, let's see if we can get a little bit closer here.
But you're getting there.
I'm getting there.
You
Yeah.
can see my Ole Miss socks. 40-point win over Tulane, and Memphis beat Mississippi State, so it's a good Sunday.
Arkansas, jeez, I'm not beating Texas. Come on. So really now, our time is just for questions and further reflection from you all. So comments or questions, please don't be shy. Or anybody on the screen, you'll have to unmute yourself on the screen. And John.
At our Rotary Club meeting about 3 weeks ago, we had Alexander, Chief of Police. And at the conclusion, I asked him, why did some kids at Alexandria City High School, why did they not, were they not comfortable with school resource officers? Because I happen to believe, even though my kids are older, I believe they're necessary. And his comment goes to something that you said. His comment was that grandparents, great-grandparents often tell their kids, don't do that, or the policeman will get you. And that message goes through, because I couldn't imagine why kids in high school would be scared of a school resource officer. So what we say and how we say it is another issue. The second issue, until I retired, I was in the design and construction business. And I have noted in Alexandria in particular, Northern Virginia, the huge number of Latino construction people. Many of them have started their own companies. I grew up in South Carolina. I believe, I don't make any excuses for it. It was totally segregated all the way through the Citadel. But I was in the military, and it was only one thing in the military: you were watching each other's back, and you weren't, as Erskine said, we were colorblind. But I growing up in South Carolina, seeing people work, being willing to work, and I come here and notice in the construction business, huge number of people are Latino, but very few Black. We had a speaker at our Rotary Club, and I asked him, I said, I have the sense that the Latino people are more successful here than Blacks. And I believe it's because they maintain their family structure and they tend to be more religious, Catholic particularly. And his comment was, yes, that is correct. But the Latino community also grows up with a work ethic that you must work hard. I'm of the opinion that one of the problems with the Black community, particularly in DC, is that they lack of father participation. Most every Black person that I've met that's been successful has had a father involved in their life, or a very strong mother or grandmother, as you described. So I'm interested in your perspective from that standpoint.
Yeah, and on the first part on the police officers, it's, I want to get an impression that at least one example I give is my own kids is they love police officers, and they both have at least one point where police officers for Halloween. I dressed up as a police officer for Halloween because we all want to be the police family. Police officers have a built-in goodwill, I think, with kids that is just there. I don't know where it comes from. Like, we watched the Paw Patrol movie a couple of weeks ago, and Paw Patrol has, there's Chase as the police officer dog, and my kids love Chase, and it's like, they love Chase because he protects the community. Oh, police officer protects the community. We really love him. So I don't feel there's a connection between here is how you should act to make sure when you cross the bad police officer that there's a connection between, at least for me, if there wasn't a connection, I don't think it was like kids that they don't like any police officers. But there's not a, like, I know Oliver doesn't like bees, and so whenever he sees a bee, he just squeals and like, oh, it's fine, you're 2,000 times bigger than that bee. They don't have that interaction when you see a police officer. They're like, oh my God, we gotta be careful. It's like, no. Like, there's a police officer in the farmer's market, we can go up to him and talk to him or whatever. There's no instant fears to get the police officer. But when they are in an interaction with a police officer, like, oh, I'm here as I'm a police officer, they know I try to teach them how to do that.
As opposed to when I drive and my kids see a police car, and they're like, Dad, slow down, it's a police car. Yeah, very concerned.
Yes. I get that too. I get that. Yes. The second part, I've heard that before. I don't think there was the bell curve when I was growing up as a big book and could split people up. That there was innate traits in each various racial ethnic group. I don't quite believe it. I haven't seen data that would convince me otherwise. Growing up, where my father left my family when I was 2 or so, but having other friends who, it's easy to look at someone who doesn't have a father in their house, like, oh, see, that was the reason. But there isn't the opposite of, wait, why did this person kill a bunch of folks? They lived with his parents until he was 18 and went to college. No one ever thinks about that. It's always, oh, that person was just crazy after they turned 18. So I don't think there's anecdotal, because if you pick out that data, it's there. I don't think there's actually real data of, oh, this is why this group of people maybe have more prone for X because of Y of their father. I just don't know that's a part. And I've heard about like, oh, well, one group is more religious than the other. I don't know. I went to church a lot. It didn't matter that my dad wasn't there or what have you. Like, it was a very religious upbringing. So I put my religiosity up against anyone else, and I think I would fare pretty well. So I don't think that is a variable that well, it mattered. I don't think it was why I became who or what have you. I think there's lots of others.
Yeah, Melinda.
So in the Therefore Committee, we talked a lot about how should Westminster think about having a more diverse membership, should we be actively trying to recruit people of color to come to our church? And we talked about that some. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, Donald, is I heard a speaker once, a female Black woman, who said, my white friends are always trying to get me to come to their churches. But what they don't understand is that my church, my Black church, is the one place that I can go where I can be free from all of these little insults and things that happen to me the rest of the week because I'm a person of color. I can go to church and know that that's one safe place for me, that I don't have to deal with that. And Martin Luther King famously said that 11 o'clock on Sunday was the most segregated hour of the week. How do your Black friends and families respond to you attending a white church? And what pressure is there on you to attend a Black church as opposed to a white church?
Yeah, I mean, from family, no pressure. So the reason why we picked Westminster, or went the Presbyterian route, where my wife, like I said, grew up Catholic, and it was what is in the middle of a Pentecostal church.
Everything.
But it was like, so I went to a cafeteria with her, and I was like, this is just way too much. I cannot do this. It was just too very silent. I couldn't do it. And then we were here, and she's like, man, they interact so much with the, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess we're not going to go to the Black church I had in our deck of churches, because that's going to be more of a call and response. So at least for us as a family, Presbyterian was kind of like that middle ground that we thought. But that is a question I think about there, and I think when I think about this, I think about a member. So when I started going to the Presbyterian church, it was mixed race. It wasn't a white church, but it was definitely more white than Pentecostal church was all Black. And there was a Black choir member who I befriended, who got along, and I was talking to her, and I was like, "Oh, where were you last Sunday?" And she's like, "Oh, the second Sunday of every month, I go to my Black church." And I was like, "Oh, like why do you do that?" It's like, I just need that time in that church, in that community, and then I come back and I'm in the choir the other 3 weeks out of the year. And so I have thought about doing a similar thing with my kids, so they would be grounded in that community, because it is, we talked a lot in therapy about Black versus white regarding racial things. There's also a lot of Black against Black racial comments that you'll get. And in college or in the Army, one of the things that really grounded me is like whenever I got something from another person of color, like, well, I know who I am. I was grounded in the Black church, and there was no stronger community of Black people than that church. And so I know being a part of that, whatever, if you don't think because I went to college that I'm Black enough, it doesn't matter. I knew how I grew up and where I was at. My kids don't have that. So it is a question I thought of myself of, are we going to start introducing them and having them go to a Black church more often, just so they can have that thing?
Dana.
Thank you both very much. The older I get, the more ignorant I realize I am. And I'm wondering, and I understand that sometimes I'll say things and not understand the various ways in which it can be taken, but I'm wondering if all children shouldn't be taught about the hands on the wheel and don't do this, don't do that, so that there is already not beginning a segregation where some people feel privileged to race wherever they want to, holding whatever they want to, and others are told to tamp down. But if we're all told the same things, that might make a difference, but I don't know.
Maybe the one question I can jump in on, since the rest is probably directed at Donald. I thought about that, and that was kind of candidly that takeaway I had from that water gun example with if Donald should be worried about it with his boys and search it out.
Right.
And I don't remember as a kid, my parents, having a number of conversations with me about the police. So it's kind of hard to point to kind of example with that, but I do think, I think I can remember being taught when I was learning to drive, that if I was ever pulled over, you put your hands on the steering wheel, things like that. But I think to your point, that may not be something that's being, that a lot of people are discussing. And so I guess as I've thought about it, with my two boys, it is going to be something we're going to talk a lot about, which is your interactions with the police. Because again, I think I continue to struggle with identifying when there is I don't want to use the word bad, which is a terrible adjective, but a bad interaction with a police officer. And was that because of race, or was that because of an assumption that was made based on the way the person was carrying themselves? And I guess from my standpoint, I tend to kind of worry that we do have some bad apples in our law enforcement. And I think we've got to really think about the type of people we're recruiting. Again, it's a small percentage, but who are we recruiting? How much are we paying them? What are we being asking them to do? And what role should they be playing in the community? But at least my side as a father, I can teach my boys the right way to interact where we at least remove that factor.
Mhm.
Now, if there's race as a factor, I can control that. I can at least control the way they respond.
Leslie?
I think another way of thinking of that also is to think about what legally should be expected in a police and a citizen encounter. So my kids, I've given them the ACLU instructions on what happens if a cop stops you. Can they search you? Can they ask you to go into their car? Or have they read you their rights? What are you, what are your rights as a citizen? And then if those are breached, doesn't matter what the color is. We should all be able to run around the street and feel safe and not feel like we're in a police state. So I don't think that I think we think about it not just as personal responsibilities to be protected from cops who are crossing the line and behaving or acting in a way that's misconduct.
Yeah, it's an interesting, obviously, more information is always great. I think the thing that I'll struggle with my boys is if a cop does cross one of those lines, what are they supposed to do?
Right.
I think what I'll tell my boys to do is try and remember the name and then do whatever he tells you.
That's right.
I mean, if he wants you to get in the back of his car, I don't want my kid to fight it. So that's where I would struggle to try and figure out how do I get through that interaction to get to the next interaction.
Right.
That'd be my fear. Whatever I gotta do to get you there, let me get there and then we'll sort it out.
We've got a good number of hands in the air, which is great. And Paige was the first one I saw, and then I think Paul was next, and then Nancy. I'll go in that order for now. So Paige.
So this is just a comment kind of pivoting off something Linda said. I saw a show on PBS back in February, and it talked about this concept of silent bias, where we, regardless of whatever the diverse population is that where we are exhibiting behaviors that we are just totally clueless to, but that is sort of making up, like you were saying, people are a little bit uncomfortable, or it's just a little bit of a slide, or it's just, and it's not even intentional. It's just things we're doing that we're not aware of. And I'm just curious if there's any way our knowledge can be heightened of what is silent bias and how do we exhibit it, so we know how to correct it if we're doing that. And so if there's any kind of content that the Therefore Project could present to us as individuals, so we are not doing that, that'd be great. Just one comment.
Sure, I think it's a great one. I think it's one that we talked about kind of during our recommendations to the session was how can we help identify materials, readings, events, and Melinda's done a number of them within Alexandria that, folks within the community of the church could go to, right? There's so much information out there. Where do you begin? What's worth your time? So I think one of the things we've included in the session recommendations was trying to develop that that library, that catalog of information for folks to go through and look through. And candidly, one of the things I thought about was, I mean, we want to make sure we're showing people a lot of different perspectives. You know, there are some that would argue that silent bias absolutely exists across all different races. And it may be a fool's errand to think you're suddenly going to eliminate it, but it is a way to try to at least be mindful that you are exhibiting it, and it can go both ways. So I think it's a great idea, and it's something that we've tried to kind of think about. How can we, again, pull together that catalog of resources for the church?
Thank you. Paul.
No, thanks a bunch, and I think that term silent bias is really good. I was thinking about your comment about sort of, knowing your rights and stuff. I think we have that silent bias that we are actually in a position to be able to assert our rights in many cases, whereas many are not. I'm thinking about the case, and I can't remember the name. The guy who was stopped by a policeman said, "By the way, I have a gun in the glove compartment," and within a very short time, he was shot without doing anything wrong. Amazing that was captured on video, so you could sort of think about that. And I think it's a great example of the kinds of silent bias that we're not aware of. The things that I take for granted that I can do are really not the case. And I think more awareness on that is something that we can all work on. That idea of silent bias, I think, has also become, unfortunately, politicized. People are accused of being too sensitive or too delicate, but with the right of talking about that openly, and understanding where you're coming from, I think is a really important way to sort of understand how you move forward. The reasons why people do things have lots and lots of reasons, and just judging on your own perspective of why they're doing that is very often the wrong reason. So sort of understanding the broader understanding of other people's conditions and approaches, and helps us address that silent bias a lot. But it takes a lot of work, and I appreciate very much what you all have done and the committee's work on this.
Thank you, Paul. I recognize Nancy, and then Whit Ayers, who is one of the co-chairs, has to be recognized on the screen, so he'll go after Nancy. So Nancy Williams, you're next, or not?
I have way too many comments. I can't decide on which one.
All right. Nancy is undecided. So Whit will be the first person from the screen to speak. So we're waiting with bated breath to see if we can hear you. So speak up.
Well, can you hear me, Larry?
Great, perfect.
Very good. I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank Donald and Erskine very much, not only for this morning, but for their very significant contributions to the work of the committee. It was really, really helpful to have both of you on it, and I appreciate this morning very much. It's a very riveting presentation. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Whit.
I'd like to second that.
Well, and I would say we have Whit and Ann were our two leaders for the effort.
Yeah.
For this job. So thank you all.
These guys added so much, along with Melinda and a number of other people, in faithful service to Westminster. And I just joined Whit in thanking. I wish I could be with you this morning, but thank you both.
And I joined too. Thank you for this wonderful presentation.
Yeah. That was Jim that just spoke up, who is also a member. Melinda was a member. I'm sure I'll leave somebody out that's in the room. I don't think so. These two guys. So other questions or comments? We've got a couple. Yeah, Phil.
I'm just wondering, I think you described your family as coming to California as part of the Great Migration out of the South. Just wondering if you had any family stories or perspectives related to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, that was it. It was, they all left Texas, first went to New York, yeah, then Chicago, and then eventually California. My great grandmother left Texas because she had 3 girls, and left her husband, who was quite the alcoholic, all those things. And then during World War II, there's obviously jobs in New York, so she went to New York she was a nurse. So she always tells the story, which there's a famous sailor kissing a nurse in New York. And whenever that'd be on PBS or other things we were watching, so like, oh, I'm so tired of that picture. I'm like, why? It seems like a normal, that seems happy. That's like the war's over. She's like, you don't understand. It happened like every week whenever like a ship would come in, she would like be carried off and, kissed by a random sailor. And she's like, by the time third or fourth ship, you're like, I just want to go home. I'm kind of tired of this. So that picture, this like was aggravating. It was like, oh, the ship is back again. So it was such a weird perspective. That's what I was thinking about when I see that photo. And then she went to Chicago and doing similar things as a nurse, and eventually made to California because her youngest daughter came out for work. And then my grandmother was a street preacher. So she was an evangelist in the Bay Area in LA. So that was how she made her living.
So when you joined, which of them were here? I remember you had.
It was my grandmother, so her daughter, my great grandmother's daughter.
So it was just your grandmother, and your mom didn't come?
No, she passed away when I was in high school.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was my mom, my godparents, my uncle, his wife.
We're all here.
We're all here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he joined the church and had
Yeah.
10 people.
They all
Nobody
know.
else has done that.
That's right.
I'll never forget that.
They want to know. Who
Yeah, that's great. And you're still here, so I guess they've approved.
Yes, they definitely.
That's good. Okay, any
Larry,
more question? Yes, Jackie.
hi, yeah, so much. I also want to thank you both, and this has just been a really enlightening conversation to have. And I don't have a question, but I want to share something that happened to me recently here in my where I live. And I had my great niece was here visiting us, and we went to the pool one day. It was right before dinner, so it wasn't very crowded. And when we walked in, one of the lifeguards, who's Jamaican, he was the only lifeguard on duty at the time. And he was sitting up in the upper deck with 4 of his friends, and they were all of dark skin. And his friends were just lounging, kind of like they were in a club. They had their feet over the chairs and their arms hanging. And I mean, it was just not a good looking picture. And number one, it didn't look good because he was up there away from the eyes on the pool. And my niece wanted to go up to that part of the pool. And when I went up there and I saw them in the corner, way in the corner, I just said to him, I went over and I said, hey, Michael, I went like this, the optics of you guys sitting up here kind of looks bad. And I meant it in a good way to, just let him know the optics, it didn't look good. He was on duty. He was far away from the front desk to greet people. Anyhow, he didn't say anything. And I went and I sat down about 5 feet away from him. And then he jumped up and he came over and got right in my face and yelled at me. And he said, what's wrong with you, Jackie? Don't you like Black people? What's wrong with you? You don't like Black people? I was shaken like a leaf. And my great niece was there, and I could see just looking up at the pool at me. And I said to him, I was shaken, and I'm still shaken now. I said, Michael, you know me. I'm there. First I said, I like everybody, Black, brown, yellow, green. I like all kinds of people, and I am one of the least prejudiced people you'll ever meet. And I'm married to, and I have an interracial marriage. My husband's brown. So please don't ever say that to me. And I meant to say what I said to him to help him, because the optics of it looks so bad. And I was just shaking like a leaf. And he doesn't talk to me now. I come into the pool area and I say hello, good morning, or something. He ignores me. And like I said, I'm shaking right now. It was very hurtful. And I don't know why he did that. And I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Jackie. Thanks for sharing. I think part of what gets us through this as a country is that people have to be able to be honest and share and to listen to one another and respond. And I think I think the tension that we're living with within our country and its divisiveness makes incidences like this escalate more than we would like. So thank you for sharing. So I think with that, Melinda, do you want to say something real quick about next week? And then I'll close with a prayer.
Sure. So next week we have the director of the Alexandria Black History Museum is coming. I think she's probably going to be on Zoom, although we haven't heard that for sure yet. But she's going to give a presentation about Alexandria's past and present with regard to civil rights. And what I've been finding out about my own research is how there was a really important event in 1939 called the Alexandria Library Sit-In, which some of you may already know about. She will be talking about, I'm sure. But it happened just a couple of months before Westminster was founded. So there's kind of an interesting little sort of coincidence there of that year. But that really was a 20 years before the Greensboro drugstore counter protest. It was an example of nonviolent protest, and it was not immediately very effective, the library sit-in, but it was a precursor of effective nonviolent protest after that. So anyway, I think her presentation is going to be really interesting, and that will sort of lay the groundwork of what race relations were like in the city of Alexandria for us to move forward and look at what was going on in the Presbyterian Church the following week with Larry, and then my presentation about what was happening here at Westminster. So,
and a couple more after that. So thank you. Thank you all for coming. I do want to close with a prayer. I want to invite you to worship in the sanctuary if you would like to do that in person, if you feel safe doing that. It continues to be great to see live faces and bodies present. And thanks to all of you all who are online too. We had about 22 online plus the people here. So let us pray. Dear God, we do give you thanks for Donald and Erskine for their sharing of their stories, their commitment to Westminster, for all of us as we seek to both live into what this country has professed in its words and what our faith teaches us, that we might listen and learn and serve and grow and become closer to that kingdom of God which Christ has brought. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you all very much.